Welcome to Book Fuel English. This audiobook is not here to motivate you, fix you, or push you to become someone else. It is here to help you understand what is already happening inside you, calmly, clearly, and without judgment. If you are emotionally aware but quietly exhausted, if you function well on the outside while carrying tension, over responsibility, or emotional overload inside, this space is for you. In this audiobook, we explore emotional boundaries not as rules or defenses, but as nervous system regulation, not through force or confrontation, but through understanding, containment, and inner safety. You don't need to take notes. You don't need to try harder. Just listen at your own pace. Let this be a place where your system can slow down, settle, and feel supported. Subscribe to Book Fuel English for long-form audiobooks on emotional regulation, inner freedom, and psychological clarity, designed for thoughtful listeners who want depth, not hype. Section 1. You're not too sensitive. The quiet exhaustion beneath being fine. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from doing too much, but from constantly holding yourself together. It is the fatigue of staying composed, attentive, responsive, and emotionally available while telling yourself that nothing is really wrong. From the outside, life appears managed. You function, you show up, you handle what needs handling. And yet inside, there is a steady depletion, as if something has been quietly draining for a long time, without ever fully emptying or refilling. This exhaustion rarely announces itself dramatically. It hums beneath the surface of ordinary days, hidden beneath competence, reliability, and the habit of being fine. Many people who live with this fatigue assume it means they are too sensitive, too reactive, or insufficiently resilient. They may have learned early to monitor themselves closely, to smooth emotional edges, to anticipate reactions, and to stay slightly ahead of discomfort. Over time, this self-monitoring becomes automatic. It no longer feels like effort. It simply feels like who you are. You notice moods shift in rooms. You register unspoken expectations. You adjust before anything is said. And because you can do this, because you have always done this, it seems normal. What often goes unnoticed is the cost of that constant adjustment. Being sensitive is not the same as being weak. Sensitivity at its core is responsiveness. It is the capacity to detect subtle changes, to register nuance, to feel impact quickly. In a regulated system, sensitivity allows for attunement, creativity, and depth. In an overextended system, that same sensitivity becomes a source of strain. The issue is not that emotions are felt deeply. The issue is that they are felt without sufficient internal protection, without a place to land, without a pause that allows them to be held rather than managed. When emotional exposure is constant, the nervous system does not get to rest. It remains oriented outward, scanning for cues, adjusting in real time, prioritizing relational stability over internal ease. This is not a conscious choice. It is an adaptive pattern shaped by experience. If at some point it felt necessary to stay alert to emotional environments, the body learned to do so efficiently. Over time, that efficiency became background noise. You may not feel anxious or distressed. You may simply feel tired in a way that sleep does not touch. This is why reassurance and encouragement often miss the mark. Being told to relax, to care less, or to toughen up assumes that the problem is excessive feeling. In reality, The problem is often prolonged exposure. Emotions are not inherently overwhelming. They become overwhelming when they arrive faster than the system can process, contain, and release them. Without containment, even mild emotional signals accumulate. They stack quietly, creating pressure without drama, fatigue without crisis. There is relief in understanding that this exhaustion is not a personal flaw, it is a physiological consequence. A nervous system that has spent years tracking others, managing tone and maintaining equilibrium, learns to prioritize safety through connection. It becomes skilled at staying engaged, responsive, and available. What it does not learn automatically is how to disengage internally while remaining present externally. That skill must be developed deliberately and gently. For many listeners, the phrase being fine is less a description than a strategy. It is a way of keeping life moving without drawing attention to internal strain. It signals capability and reliability both to others and to yourself, but it also conceals important information. When fine becomes the default response, there is little space to notice what is actually happening internally. Sensations flatten, emotions blur. The system stays operational, but disconnected from its own limits. This disconnection does not mean you lack insight. In fact, many people in this state are deeply reflective. They understand patterns, dynamics, and motivations. They can explain what is happening intellectually while still feeling unable to change how it feels. This gap between understanding and relief is often misinterpreted as resistance or avoidance. More often, it reflects a nervous system that has learned to survive through endurance rather than regulation. Endurance is costly. It relies on sustained activation, even when things appear calm. Over time, the body begins to treat ordinary interaction as something that requires preparation and recovery. You may notice a need for solitude that feels urgent, or a heaviness after social contact that you cannot fully explain. You may feel calmer alone, yet uneasy with how much you need that calm. None of this means something is wrong with you. It means your system has been working hard for a long time. What is rarely discussed is how this internal state shapes how others relate to you. When you are consistently emotionally available, responsive, and accommodating, it sends subtle signals. People do not consciously decide to rely on you more, to expect more, or to lean into your steadiness. It happens implicitly. The nervous system communicates before words do. When your system absorbs emotional impact without clear internal boundaries, others sense space where emotion can go. This does not make anyone malicious. It reflects a basic interpersonal pattern. Emotions seek regulation. When one system offers containment, others relax into it. Over time, this dynamic can leave you carrying more than your share, even in relationships that appear balanced. The result is often quiet resentment or withdrawal, not because others are doing something wrong, but because your system is overextended. Understanding this begins to shift the narrative. The issue is not that you feel too much. The issue is that feeling has become uncontained. Emotions move through you, but they do not settle. They do not resolve. They linger as tension, as vigilance, as fatigue. Without a sense of internal boundary, the system cannot distinguish between what belongs to you and what does not. This is where safety becomes essential. Not the kind of safety that comes from reassurance or explanation, but the kind that comes from slowing down enough to feel without immediately responding. Safety here means allowing the nervous system to register that it does not need to manage everything it senses, that there is time, that there is space, that not every emotional signal requires action. In the beginning, this can feel unfamiliar. If you are used to tracking and adjusting, pausing may feel like neglect. Holding emotion without acting on it may feel irresponsible. These reactions are understandable. They reflect a system that learned early that staying engaged was protective. What this work offers is not withdrawal from connection, but a different relationship to it. As we move forward, the focus will not be on becoming less sensitive, but on becoming more contained. Containment allows sensitivity to exist without depletion. It creates an internal boundary that does not require hardness or distance. It is quiet, subtle, and deeply stabilizing. Before exploring how this works physiologically and relationally, it is important to stay here a moment longer, letting the body register a simple truth. This exhaustion makes sense, and it does not define you. Section 2. Why trying harder never worked. The cost of emotional self-override. For many people, the first response to emotional difficulty is effort. Try harder to stay calm, think more positively, control the reaction, override the feeling. This approach often appears reasonable, even mature. It is praised in subtle ways: self-discipline, emotional intelligence, strength, and for a while it works well enough. You suppress what feels inconvenient, reframe what feels heavy, and keep going. The problem is not that these strategies are ineffective in the short term. The problem is what they quietly train the nervous system to do over time. Willpower-based emotional control treats emotion as something to be managed from the top down. The mind notices a feeling and intervenes. It explains, corrects, redirects, or suppresses. This creates an internal hierarchy where cognition is in charge and sensation is expected to comply. In moments of acute stress, this can be useful, but when it becomes the primary mode of regulation, it creates a subtle but persistent internal conflict. One part of the system is constantly working to contain another without ever resolving the underlying signal. Positive thinking often functions similarly. It replaces one mental state with another, more acceptable one. The intention is relief, but the method relies on bypassing. When an emotion arises and is immediately reframed, the nervous system does not complete its natural cycle. The feeling is interrupted rather than processed. Over time, this interruption accumulates. The body continues to carry the unintegrated signal, even as the mind insists that everything is fine. Suppression takes this further. It does not replace the feeling, but pushes it out of awareness altogether. This requires sustained effort. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, attention narrows. The system learns that certain internal states are unsafe to feel. Importantly, the nervous system does not forget these states. It remains vigilant, watching for their return. What appears as control is often a form of constant monitoring. Self-control, when used chronically, trains the system to stay alert. It reinforces the idea that emotional impulses must be anticipated and contained before they cause disruption. This keeps attention oriented outward, scanning for cues that might require adjustment. The body learns to stay slightly activated, even in neutral environments. Calm becomes something that must be maintained, not something that naturally arises. The cost of this approach is rarely immediate. It shows up gradually as a sense of effortfulness beneath everyday interactions. Conversations feel taxing even when they are pleasant. Decisions require more energy than they should. Rest does not fully restore. There may be a low-level irritability or numbness that is difficult to name. None of this feels dramatic enough to justify concern, which is why it often goes unaddressed. From a nervous system perspective, chronic self-override communicates a specific message. Internal signals are not to be trusted. The system learns that sensation is something to be managed, not listened to. This disrupts the feedback loop that allows regulation to occur naturally. Regulation depends on accurate perception and timely response. When perception is overridden and response is forced, regulation is replaced by control. Control is inherently effortful. It requires ongoing input. Regulation, by contrast, is adaptive. It allows the system to move between states with relative ease. When regulation is present, emotions rise and fall without requiring constant supervision. When control dominates, the system becomes rigid. It can hold itself together, but it cannot relax into coherence. This distinction helps explain why trying harder often makes things worse. When you attempt to force calm, you add another layer of effort to an already taxed system. The body interprets this effort as further evidence that something is wrong. Activation increases even as the mind insists on composure. The result is a paradoxical state, appearing calm while feeling internally tense. Over time, the nervous system adapts to this pattern. It becomes efficient at compliance. It learns to respond quickly to perceived demands, both internal and external. This efficiency is often mistaken for emotional maturity. In reality, it reflects a system that has learned to prioritize stability over authenticity, responsiveness over rest. This adaptation also shapes relational dynamics. When you habitually override your own emotional signals, you remain available to others regardless of internal cost. You can listen, support, accommodate, and adjust without outward signs of strain. This availability is felt by others at a nervous system level. It is not a conscious assessment. It is an implicit sensing of capacity. Humans are wired to seek regulation through connection. When one system appears stable and responsive, others naturally lean toward it. This is not exploitation. It is a basic biological process. The difficulty arises when the stability being offered is maintained through self-override rather than genuine regulation. In that case, the system offering support is slowly depleted, even as it continues to appear capable. Because this dynamic operates below awareness, it can be difficult to interrupt. You may notice that people confide in you easily, rely on you emotionally, or expect your understanding. You may also notice a reluctance to ask for support yourself, not because you do not need it, but because your system is oriented toward holding rather than being held. This orientation was learned, not chosen. Importantly, none of this means that willpower, positive thinking, or self-control are inherently harmful. They become problematic when they are used as substitutes for regulation. Regulation does not require force, it requires capacity. Capacity is built through allowing the nervous system to complete its cycles, to feel without immediate correction, and to return to baseline without coercion. The shift from control to regulation is subtle. It does not involve abandoning responsibility or becoming reactive. It involves trusting that the body has its own intelligence and that listening is more efficient than overriding. This trust often feels risky at first, especially if control had been equated with safety. Letting go of effort can feel like losing structure, even when that structure has been exhausting. As this exploration continues, the focus will move away from managing emotion through effort and toward understanding how regulation actually occurs. This requires a different orientation, one that begins not with strategy, but with physiology. Before boundaries can change externally, the internal system that supports them must be understood. That understanding begins with how the nervous system detects, responds to, and recovers from emotional input. Section 3, the social nervous system, how others sense your inner boundaries. Human interaction is far less verbal than we like to believe. Long before words are exchanged, nervous systems are already communicating. This communication is quiet, constant, and mostly unconscious. It happens through timing, tone, breath, posture, eye movement, and subtle shifts in attention. It happens even when nothing obvious is happening, especially then. This is the level at which boundaries are first perceived, long before they are spoken or enforced. Most people think of boundaries as decisions or behaviors, what to say yes to, what to say no to, how to explain limits clearly. While those aspects matter, they rest on a deeper foundation. Boundaries are first physiological. They begin as internal signals that shape how available, stable, and self-contained you feel in the presence of others. Before someone responds to your words, their nervous system has already responded to your state. This is not something others do deliberately. There is no conscious evaluation happening. The social nervous system evolved to read safety and availability quickly because connection has always been tied to survival. We are wired to sense where regulation is present and where it is not. We lean towards steadiness. We relax around containment. We feel unsettled around tension, even if we cannot explain why. When your nervous system is regulated, your presence has a certain quality. Movements are economical. Speech has natural pauses. Attention can rest without collapsing or overreaching. There is a felt sense of being with yourself while being with others. This internal coherence sends a clear signal. There is structure here. There is capacity, but it is not limitless. Others may not articulate this consciously, but they respond to it. They pace themselves differently. They ask differently. They adjust. When regulation is absent, different signals emerge. Emotional availability becomes diffuse. Attention moves outward quickly. Micro adjustments happen constantly. There may be subtle urgency in speech or a readiness to fill silence, or a tendency to lean forward emotionally, even when nothing is being asked. None of this is intentional. It reflects a system that has learned to stay engaged to maintain safety. Self-abandonment at this level is not dramatic. It does not look like giving everything away. It looks like leaving yourself slightly. It looks like tracking others more than tracking your own internal state. It looks like responding before you have fully registered what you feel. These patterns are invisible to the mind but clear to the nervous system. They communicate availability without containment. Others feel this as openness, as ease of access, as emotional space that can be entered without resistance. Again, this is not a moral failing on anyone's part. Emotions seek regulation. When one system appears open and responsive, others naturally orient toward it. This is how co-regulation works when it is mutual. It becomes problematic only when it flows in one direction. A regulated system does not need to advertise its boundaries. They are implicit. They exist in the pacing of interaction, in the way attention returns inward after engagement. In the absence of urgency, this implicit quality is what many people describe as presence. It is not charisma, it is coherence. And coherence changes how others behave, often without either party realizing why. By contrast, an unregulated system often compensates through explanation or assertion. It may try to set boundaries verbally while the body signals openness. This creates confusion. Words say one thing, physiology says another. In these cases, others may respect the words intellectually but not adjust behaviorally. The boundary does not hold, not because it was unclear, but because it was not supported internally. This is why many people experience repeated frustration around boundaries. They explain themselves carefully. They justify limits. They try to be firm but kind, and yet the same dynamics return. Requests continue. Expectations persist. The conclusion is often self-blame. Not assertive enough, not clear enough, too accommodating. What is missed is the underlying nervous system signal that remains unchanged. Tone carries more information than content. A calm voice with subtle tension communicates something different than a calm voice with internal ease. The difference is often imperceptible consciously, but it is felt. Breath that is shallow communicates readiness. Breath that moves fully communicates space. Eye contact that is steady without searching communicates presence. Eye contact that seeks reassurance communicates availability. These signals shape interaction continuously. Posture also matters, not as a performance, but as an expression of internal organization. A body that is held rigidly communicates defense. A body that is collapsed communicates surrender. A body that is upright without effort communicates stability. Others respond accordingly. They lean in, pull back, or settle, often without knowing why. Pacing is another key signal. When responses come too quickly, it can communicate urgency or eagerness. When responses are delayed naturally, it communicates consideration. This is not about playing games. It is about allowing internal signals to register before responding. That pause, even when brief, changes the relational field. None of this requires others to be conscious or malicious. These are automatic processes. Just as you may feel more relaxed around certain people without knowing why, others respond to your internal state in the same way. The nervous system is always asking one question: where is regulation available? Where can I rest? Where must I stay alert? When you consistently provide regulation for others without receiving it in return, your system learns to remain active. It becomes the stable one, the understanding one, the one who can hold. Over time, this role can feel fixed. It can feel like identity, and changing it can feel risky, not because others will be upset, but because your system has learned that connection depends on availability. Understanding this reframes the entire boundary conversation. The issue is not that people treat you a certain way because of your worth or personality. The issue is that they are responding to signals your nervous system is sending, signals that were shaped by adaptation. These signals can change, not through force, but through regulation. As internal containment increases, external dynamics shift. Often subtly at first, people may pause more. They may ask rather than assume. They may offer support where they once expected it. Sometimes they may pull back slightly, sensing less access. This can feel disorienting if your system is accustomed to being leaned on. It may even trigger guilt or anxiety. These reactions are part of recalibration, not evidence of harm. Importantly, regulation does not make you closed. It makes you selective without effort. You can still be warm, empathic, and present. The difference is that presence no longer requires self-leaving. Emotion can move through without spilling outward. Attention can engage without abandoning the body. This is why boundaries that emerge from regulation feel different from boundaries enforced through control. They do not require vigilance. They do not need constant reinforcement. They are felt. Others sense them before they are spoken. And because they are not defended, they are often respected more easily. As this understanding deepens, the focus naturally turns inward. If social dynamics are shaped at the level of the nervous system, then change must begin there as well. Before addressing emotional leakage or containment directly, it is necessary to see clearly how signals are sent and received. This clarity creates space for a different kind of protection, one that does not rely on distance or explanation, but on internal organization and safety. Section 4. Emotional leakage. What happens when feelings have no container? Emotions are not problems to solve. They are signals designed to move, inform, and resolve within a living system. When they are allowed to do this, they rise, crest, and fall with surprising efficiency. When they are not, they do not disappear. They spread, they diffuse, they leak into places they were never meant to go. Emotional leakage is not about having emotions. It is about having emotions without an internal structure strong enough to hold them. Most people are taught to think in terms of expression versus suppression. Either you let emotions out or you keep them in. This framing misses something essential. There is a third option, quieter and more stable: containment. Containment does not mean denying what you feel. It means allowing emotion to be present inside you without requiring immediate action, explanation, or discharge. Without containment, expression becomes spilling and suppression becomes pressure. Both lead to leakage, just in different forms. When emotions have no container, they look for one. They move outward through behavior, tone, urgency, or collapse. Over-explaining is one common pathway. You feel something internally, perhaps discomfort or uncertainty, and before it has time to settle, it moves into language. You justify, clarify, soften, or elaborate. Not because you owe an explanation, but because the emotion has nowhere else to go. Words become a release valve. Overgiving functions similarly. An uncontained emotional state often carries a subtle tension, a sense of imbalance. Giving time, energy, understanding, or reassurance can temporarily relieve that tension. The system feels calmer when it is doing something, but this relief is short-lived because the underlying signal was never integrated. The emotion moves outward, but it does not resolve. It returns often stronger, asking again for release. Defensiveness is another form of leakage. When an emotion is triggered and there is no internal space to feel it, the system moves quickly to protect itself. Tone sharpens, justifications arise, boundaries are asserted with force rather than clarity. The body reacts before understanding has time to emerge. This is not a character flaw. It is what happens when emotional activation exceeds containment capacity. Collapse is the opposite movement, but it comes from the same source. When the system cannot hold what it feels and cannot discharge it outward safely, it shuts down. Energy drops, engagement fades. There may be withdrawal, numbness, or resignation. This is not rest. It is overload without outlet. Emotions still exist here, but they are pressed inward, diffuse, and unresolved. All of these patterns create confusion in relationships. Others respond not to what you feel, but to how it leaks. Over-explaining can feel like insecurity. Over-giving can feel like availability without limit. Defensiveness can feel like hostility. Collapse can feel like disengagement. None of these reflect your actual intention. They reflect a nervous system trying to regulate without sufficient internal support. This is where the difference between emotional openness and emotional exposure becomes important. Openness is a capacity. It allows emotion to be felt and shared selectively, with timing and choice. Exposure is a state. It happens when emotions are unprotected and spill outward before they are understood or contained. Exposure often masquerades as honesty, but it leaves the system raw and reactive. Many people pride themselves on openness while quietly feeling exhausted by it. They share readily, feel deeply, and connect quickly, yet struggle with resentment, misunderstanding, or imbalance. What is missing is not insight or empathy. It is internal protection. Without protection, openness becomes a demand rather than a choice. Containment provides that protection. It is not rigid. It is not closed. It is like a vessel that allows movement without spillage. Within containment, emotions can be felt fully without dictating behavior. They can inform rather than drive. This allows clarity to emerge naturally. When you speak from this place, words are fewer, slower, and more precise. When you give from this place, it is sustainable. When you set limits, they feel firm without force. Without containment, relationships become unstable. The emotional field shifts unpredictably. Others may feel unsure of where they stand. You may feel unseen or overextended. Over time, resentment can build, not because needs were ignored, but because they were never clearly held. Emotional leakage creates noise. It obscures signal. This noise often leads people to conclude that they need stronger boundaries, better communication, or tougher skin. While these may help at the surface, they do not address the source. The source is internal capacity. Until emotions have somewhere to go inside you, they will continue to go everywhere else. Containment changes this dynamic quietly. When emotion is held internally, it no longer demands immediate resolution. It can be sensed in the body without being acted out. This slows interaction naturally. Pauses appear, choices become clearer. Others respond to this stability without needing explanation. The relational field settles. Importantly, containment does not mean doing nothing. It means allowing the nervous system to process emotion through sensation rather than action. This processing takes time, but far less time than chronic leakage consumes. What feels inefficient at first often proves deeply restorative. As containment grows, emotional signals become clearer. You can distinguish between what is yours and what is not, between impulse and intention, between discomfort that needs attention and discomfort that needs space. This clarity reduces misunderstanding, both internally and relationally. It restores proportion. The absence of containment often keeps people trapped in cycles of explanation and repair. Something leaks. A reaction happens. Clarification follows. Apologies are made. Understanding is reached temporarily. Then the cycle repeats. Containment interrupts this loop at its origin. It allows emotion to settle before it enters the relational space. This is not about becoming less emotional. It is about becoming less diffuse. Emotions become more precise when they are held. They carry information rather than pressure. They move through rather than outward. This precision is stabilizing, both for you and for those around you. As we move forward, the focus will turn toward how containment is built physiologically, not through effort or control, but through regulation. Regulation expands capacity. It gives emotions somewhere to go. Before exploring techniques directly, it is important to recognize this pattern clearly. Emotional leakage is not failure. It is information. It points directly to the need for internal safety and structure. Section 5. Regulation. Before boundaries, teaching the body it is safe to pause. At a certain point, understanding alone stops being enough. You can see the patterns clearly. You recognize emotional leakage. You understand why effort and control failed, and yet, in real moments, the body still reacts before choice appears. Urgency rises, words come quickly, attention moves outward. This is where many people feel discouraged, as if insight should have already created change. What is missing is not insight, it is regulation. Regulation does not begin with decisions or conversations. It begins with the body learning that it is safe to slow down. For a nervous system shaped by prolonged emotional demand, pausing can feel unfamiliar, even threatening. Speed became protective. Responsiveness became safety. Slowing down may register as risk before it registers as relief. This is why regulation must be taught gently, through experience, not forced through intention. The nervous system organizes around rhythm. Breath, heart rate, muscle tone, and attention all move together. When these rhythms are fast and shallow, the system stays prepared. When they are slower and fuller, the system settles. Emotional protection begins when you learn to influence these rhythms from the inside, without needing a situation to change first. Internal pacing is one of the simplest and most overlooked aspects of regulation. It is not about doing less, but about doing at the speed the body can actually integrate. Many people move faster than their nervous system can process, especially in relational moments. Responses come before sensations are fully registered. Regulation begins when you allow a fraction more time between stimulus and response, not to decide, but to feel. This pause does not have to be obvious. It can be as small as noticing your feet on the ground before speaking, or allowing one full breath to complete before answering a question. These micro pauses communicate something powerful to the nervous system. There is time. Nothing terrible will happen if I wait a moment. Over time, these signals accumulate. The system begins to trust that it does not need to rush to stay safe. Breath plays a central role here, not as a technique to perform, but as a rhythm to allow. When emotional activation rises, breath often becomes shallow or held. This is not a mistake. It is part of the body's preparation. Regulation does not require correcting this immediately. It begins with noticing it, allowing the next breath to arrive without forcing depth, letting the exhale complete itself fully. These small shifts tell the system that the moment does not require emergency response. Attention is the third component. Where attention goes, regulation follows. In emotionally demanding moments, attention often leaves the body and moves toward the other person, the outcome, or the imagined consequence. Regulation asks for some attention to return inward, not to analyze but to sense the weight of the body, the temperature of the skin, the contact with support. This inward attention creates an internal anchor. When breath, pacing, and attention align, something subtle happens. Emotion can arise without immediately turning into action. Sensation becomes tolerable. The urge to explain or fix softens. This is containment beginning to form, not as a wall, but as capacity. The system learns that feeling does not require discharge. This learning cannot be rushed. A nervous system that has been oriented outward for years needs repetition to trust inward stability. Early attempts at pausing may feel awkward or insufficient. You may notice emotion intensify briefly when you do not act on it. This does not mean regulation is failing. It means the system is discovering that sensation can be felt directly. With time, intensity gives way to clarity. It is important to note that regulation is not withdrawal. You are not disengaging from others. You are engaging differently. When you regulate internally, you remain present without becoming absorbed. You listen without leaving yourself. You respond without urgency. Others often sense this shift before you do. Conversations slow naturally. Demands soften. Space appears. This is why regulation must come before boundaries. Boundaries attempted from an unregulated state require effort. They feel tense, brittle, or guilty. Boundaries that emerge from regulation feel obvious. They do not need justification. They are simply where the system settles. Others adjust to them because they are supported by physiology, not willpower. As regulation becomes familiar, emotional signals change quality. Instead of pressure, they carry information. You can feel discomfort without panic. You can feel desire without compulsion. You can feel hesitation without collapse. This differentiation is the foundation of choice. Choice does not arise from thinking harder. It arises from a system that is not overwhelmed. There is a common fear that slowing down will make you passive or indecisive. In practice, the opposite is true. When the nervous system is regulated, responses become more precise. You speak less, but with more clarity. You act less, but with more alignment. Energy is conserved rather than spent managing reaction. This internal work also changes how you experience responsibility. When unregulated, responsibility feels heavy and urgent. Everything seems to require your attention now. When regulated, responsibility becomes proportional. You can sense what is yours to hold and what is not. This sensing happens in the body before it becomes a thought. Regulation is built through repetition, not perfection. Each time you pause instead of rush, even briefly, you reinforce safety. Each time you notice sensation without acting, you expand capacity. Over time, the baseline shifts. What once required effort becomes natural. The body learns that it can stay with itself and remain connected. As this foundation strengthens, emotional protection no longer depends on managing others. It lives inside you. This internal protection is quiet. It does not announce itself, but it changes everything downstream. Before exploring how to hold emotion more deliberately, it is essential to let this truth settle. Sustainable boundaries grow from a regulated body, not a defended mind. Section 6. Containment Practices. Holding emotion without acting it out. Containment begins at the moment when emotion arises and nothing immediately happens. No explanation, no correction, no movement outward, just sensation, present inside a body that does not rush to resolve it. This moment is small, almost unremarkable, yet it is where internal authority quietly returns. Not authority as control, but authority as orientation. The sense that something is happening inside you, and you are still here. Most people have never been taught how to stay with emotion without either expressing it or suppressing it. The system learned early that feeling required action. Say something, fix something, do something, or if that was unsafe, disappear internally. Containment offers a third pathway. It allows emotion to be felt as sensation rather than obligation. The first practice is simple presence with sensation. When emotion appears, it often comes with a story attached. Thoughts rush in to explain, justify, anticipate, or defend. Containment does not fight these thoughts. It gently shifts attention beneath them to the physical experience underneath: tightness, heat, pressure, movement. This is not analysis. It is contact. Sensation is the language the nervous system understands. Staying with sensation does not mean intensifying it. It means letting it exist without interference. You are not trying to calm it. You are not trying to understand it. You are allowing it to be there while remaining oriented to your own body. This alone changes the trajectory of emotion. What was once urgent begins to feel workable. What felt overwhelming becomes specific. Impulse often follows emotion closely. The impulse to speak, to explain, to reach out, to withdraw. Containment does not require resisting impulse. It requires delaying it long enough to feel it fully. Impulse is energy. When you do not act on it immediately, that energy does not disappear. It reorganizes. It often reveals what the emotion actually needs. This delay is not a rule. It is a space. Even a few seconds can be enough. In that space, something important happens. The nervous system learns that impulse does not control outcome, that nothing catastrophic occurs when action is paused. This learning builds trust internally. Trust that you can feel without reacting. Trust that you can stay present without collapsing or escalating. Thoughts also change under containment. When emotion is uncontained, thoughts tend to be repetitive and circular. They seek resolution through explanation. When emotion is held, thoughts slow. They become fewer and more relevant. You may notice that you no longer need to say everything you were about to say. The urge dissolves because the emotion no longer needs a container outside you. This is how containment reduces the need for validation. When emotions are uncontained, they look outward for stabilization. Someone else must understand, agree, reassure, or respond correctly for the system to settle. With containment, stabilization happens internally first. External validation may still be welcome, but it is no longer required for regulation. This shifts relational dynamics immediately. Internal authority grows quietly through these moments. Each time you feel something fully without acting it out, you reinforce the sense that you can be with yourself. This authority is not rigid, it is responsive. It allows you to choose expression rather than be driven by it. When you do speak, it is because you want to, not because you must. Containment also changes how you relate to discomfort. Discomfort is often mistaken for danger. The body reacts accordingly. By staying with discomfort without forcing resolution, you teach the system that discomfort is survivable, that it has a beginning, middle, and end. This reduces fear around feeling itself. Emotions become events rather than threats. One of the most subtle containment practices involves attention to boundaries inside the body. Where do you end and the world begins? This is not conceptual, it is sensory. Feeling the weight of your body against a chair, the contact of feet with the ground, the outline of your form in space. These sensations reinforce internal structure. They remind the nervous system that you are here, contained, supported. As containment deepens, you may notice a reduction in over-explaining. Words come later, if at all. You no longer feel compelled to clarify every feeling. Silence becomes more comfortable. This is not withdrawal, it is completion. The emotion has been processed internally, so it does not need to be processed relationally unless you choose. Defensiveness also softens. When you can feel emotion without acting, you do not need to protect yourself preemptively. You can listen without preparing a response. You can pause without feeling exposed. This creates space for genuine understanding, both of yourself and others. Containment does not mean you never express emotion. It means expression comes from clarity rather than pressure. When you speak from containment, your words carry weight. They are simpler. They land differently. Others sense the difference even if they cannot name it. Over time, these practices change identity subtly. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must manage emotional flow constantly. You become someone who can hold. This holding is not heavy. It is stabilizing. It frees energy previously spent on vigilance and repair. Self-trust grows here, not as a belief, but as a felt experience. You trust yourself because you have evidence. You have stayed. You have felt. You have not fallen apart. This trust reduces the need for external reference points. Decisions become easier because they are grounded in sensation, not anxiety. It is important to emphasize that containment is learned through repetition, not force. Some days it will feel accessible. Other days it will not. This variability is part of regulation, not a failure of it. Each attempt teaches the system something, even when it feels incomplete. As containment becomes more familiar, emotional protection feels less like something you do and more like something you are. You move through situations without leaking, not because you are guarded, but because you are held. This holding is internal, portable, and reliable. With this capacity in place, emotional life changes texture. There is less urgency, less noise, less repair. What remains is clearer, quieter, and more grounded. From here, applying this capacity to relationships becomes less about strategy and more about presence. That application is where the work naturally moves next, as containment meets real life. Section 7. Relationships without self-loss. How protection changes interaction. When emotional protection becomes internal rather than strategic, relationships begin to change without announcement. There is no confrontation, no new language, no sudden assertion of limits. Instead, something quieter shifts. The rhythm of interaction alters. The pace slows. Responses come later, or not at all. What once felt automatic becomes optional. This is often disorienting at first, not because anything is wrong, but because familiarity dissolves before clarity fully arrives. Many people associate change in relationships with effort, saying something difficult, drawing lines, explaining needs. These approaches are sometimes necessary, but they are not the source of the deepest shifts. The most consequential changes occur when your nervous system no longer offers unregulated access. When emotional availability becomes grounded rather than diffuse, others feel it immediately. Not intellectually, viscerally, conversations begin to feel different. You may notice that you listen without leaning forward internally. You no longer rush to reassure, clarify, or soften every edge. Silence becomes more tolerable. You are not filling space to manage discomfort. This changes the conversational field. Others may speak more slowly. They may choose words more carefully. They may pause themselves, sensing a different quality of attention. This does not mean you become distant. In fact, many people report feeling more present. The difference is that presence is no longer achieved by self-leaving. You are there, but you are also here, inside your own body. This dual orientation stabilizes interaction. It signals that connection is possible without collapse or overextension. Decision-making also shifts. When unprotected, decisions often carry emotional urgency. You decide quickly to relieve tension, to avoid disappointment, to maintain harmony. With protection, urgency softens. You can feel hesitation without needing to resolve it immediately. You can allow uncertainty to exist. Decisions emerge more slowly, but they are cleaner. They reflect what is sustainable, not what is expedient. Others sense this change in availability, not as rejection, but as boundary. Requests may become more tentative. Expectations may recalibrate. Sometimes people will check in rather than assume. This is not because you have become intimidating. It is because your system no longer signals unlimited access. There is structure now. Structure invites respect. Power dynamics often become visible at this stage. When emotional access was unregulated, power may have flowed subtly away from you. You were the one who adjusted, accommodated, absorbed. With protection, that flow evens out. You no longer carry emotional weight that is not yours. This redistribution can feel unfamiliar to others. Some may respond with curiosity, others with mild discomfort. Both are normal. It is important to note that discomfort in others does not mean harm is being done. It often means a system is adjusting to a new equilibrium. When someone is used to leaning emotionally, they may feel momentarily unsteady when that support changes. This does not require fixing. Holding your internal ground is enough. The nervous system learned through experience, not explanation. Conflict, when it arises, also changes shape. Without protection, conflict can feel overwhelming or destabilizing. Emotions spill, words escalate, repair becomes urgent. With protection, conflict becomes more contained. You can feel activation without being overtaken by it. You can hear disagreement without defending your identity. Responses become fewer and more deliberate. This containment does not eliminate emotion. It organizes it. Anger may still arise, but it does not need to discharge immediately. Sadness may appear, but it does not collapse you. Disappointment can be felt without turning into self-blame or withdrawal. This changes how conflict resolves. Not faster, necessarily, but more cleanly. One of the most noticeable shifts is in how much you explain yourself. When emotions are protected, explanations become optional rather than compulsory. You may find yourself saying less, not because you are withholding, but because there is less to justify. Your internal state no longer demands external validation. This simplicity often surprises others. It may even unsettle those who were accustomed to more access. Respect often emerges here, quietly, not the performative kind, but the practical kind. People take you at face value. They adjust expectations. They sense limits without needing to test them. This respect is not earned through force. It arises naturally when boundaries are embodied rather than argued. Disappointment also becomes easier to tolerate, both yours and others. When protected, you can allow someone else to be disappointed without rushing to repair it. This is a profound shift. It communicates trust in the relationship's capacity to hold tension. It also communicates self-trust, that you do not need to manage every emotional outcome to remain connected. Some relationships will deepen in this environment. Mutuality becomes possible when both systems are regulated. Others may change or fade. This is not a failure. It reflects alignment. Relationships organized around unregulated access often cannot sustain themselves once that access closes. What remains is more honest, more spacious. Importantly, protection does not make you rigid. You can still choose to be generous, to listen deeply, to offer support. The difference is that these choices come from abundance rather than obligation. You give because you want to, not because your system needs relief. This distinction is felt by others. It changes the quality of exchange. There may be moments of doubt. You may wonder if you are becoming selfish or cold. These thoughts often arise from old conditioning, not current reality. A system that learned to equate availability with safety will question any change in that pattern. Over time, as relationships stabilize or clarify, these doubts tend to soften. What becomes clear is that you are no longer negotiating your presence moment by moment. You are not constantly adjusting to maintain equilibrium. This frees attention. You can notice what you enjoy, what drains you, what feels neutral. These signals were always there, but they were drowned out by urgency. As relationships reorganize, you may feel a growing sense of steadiness, not excitement, not intensity, but reliability. You know where you stand with yourself. This internal reference point reduces anxiety around interaction. You do not need to anticipate every outcome. You can meet what arises with proportion. This is how emotional protection expresses itself relationally. Not as distance, but as clarity. Not as control, but as coherence. Others respond to this because it is easier to be with. It requires less negotiation, less repair, less vigilance. From here, a further shift becomes possible. As effort decreases and regulation stabilizes, interaction begins to feel less managed altogether. Boundaries become implicit. Flow replaces vigilance. Understanding this transition requires looking beyond interaction itself toward the difference between effort and ease. That movement from doing to allowing is where the work continues next. Section 8. From effort to ease. Letting boundaries become implicit. There is a point in this process where something important changes, not dramatically, but quietly. You notice that you are no longer thinking about boundaries as often. You are not rehearsing responses in advance. You are not monitoring yourself for correctness. The work has not disappeared, but it has moved beneath the surface. What once required attention now unfolds on its own. This is the shift from effort to ease. Effort was necessary in the beginning. When a nervous system has been organized around vigilance and responsiveness, nothing new happens automatically. Pausing feels unnatural. Containment feels uncertain. Regulation feels fragile. Effort creates interruption. It breaks momentum. It gives the system a chance to experience something different. But effort was never meant to be permanent. It is a bridge, not a destination. Self-management relies on effort. It asks the mind to stay involved at every step. Monitor this feeling. Adjust that response. Hold yourself back here. Push yourself forward there. Even when done skillfully, self-management is tiring. It keeps attention split between what is happening and what should be happening. The nervous system remains active even when things appear calm. Ease emerges when regulation becomes embodied. This means the body no longer waits for instruction. It has learned through repetition that it can slow down, stay present, and remain connected without collapsing or overextending. Boundaries no longer need to be constructed moment by moment. They are implied by the system's state. Implicit boundaries are not passive. They are clear without being sharp. They exist in how you move, speak, listen, and decide. You do not need to signal them explicitly because they are already communicated through coherence. Others feel where you end and they begin, not because you told them, but because your system knows. This is where surrender replaces control. Surrender does not mean giving up or disengaging. It means releasing the need to manage outcomes continuously. When you trust regulation, you do not need to supervise every interaction. You allow yourself to be affected without being overtaken. You allow situations to unfold without intervening prematurely. Many people misunderstand surrender as weakness because they associate safety with effort. If you stop trying, something bad might happen. Someone might take too much. A boundary might be crossed. An emotion might overwhelm you. These fears make sense in a system that learns safety through vigilance. Ease asks the body to learn safety through stability instead. Stability feels different from control. Control feels tight, alert, prepared. Stability feels grounded, responsive, and flexible. When stable, you do not need to anticipate every possibility. You can respond as things actually happen. This reduces internal noise. Attention frees up. Energy returns. Emotional protection in this stage is almost invisible. You are not guarding yourself. You are not closing down. You are simply present in a way that does not leak. Emotions still arise, but they do not rush outward. They move within a container that has become familiar and reliable. Because of this, you expend far less energy managing yourself. This ease often brings an unexpected sense of neutrality. Interactions that once felt charged now feel ordinary. Situations that once required preparation now require little thought. This can feel anticlimactic at first. When intensity drops, the system may interpret it as loss. In reality, it is regulation settling in. With ease comes proportion. You react to what is happening, not to what might happen. Your responses match the moment. You no longer overcorrect. You no longer underrespond. This proportionality is deeply stabilizing. It allows trust to build, both internally and relationally. Boundaries in this state are not decisions you make. They are conditions you live within. You notice when something feels aligned and when it does not. You move accordingly, often without explanation. This movement feels natural rather than defended. Others adjust because there is nothing to push against. One of the clearest signs of integration is reduced self-reference. You spend less time thinking about how you are doing, how you are coming across, or whether you handled something correctly. Not because you stopped caring, but because the system no longer requires constant monitoring. This frees mental space. Presence deepens. Ease also changes how you relate to mistakes. When boundaries were effortful, mistakes felt costly. A missed pause, an overextension, a reactive moment could trigger self-criticism. In an integrated state, mistakes are information. The system notices, recalibrates, and moves on. There is less drama. Repair is simpler. This does not mean life becomes frictionless. Challenges still arise. Emotions still move. The difference is that friction no longer threatens stability. You can experience difficulty without losing ground. This resilience is not dramatic. It is quiet and reliable. As boundaries become implicit, you may notice a shift in identity. You are no longer the person who manages everything. You are no longer defined by responsiveness or availability. There is more space to discover what else you are when effort recedes. This discovery can feel subtle, even empty at times. That emptiness is not absence. It is openness. In this openness, preferences become clearer. You know what you enjoy without analyzing it. You know what drains you without justifying it. Choices feel less moral and more practical. This practicality reduces inner conflict. You stop negotiating with yourself constantly. Others may comment on this change, though often indirectly. They may say you seem calmer, more grounded, harder to read, or more settled. These observations reflect the nervous system shift more than personality change. You are not becoming someone else. You are becoming less fragmented. Ease also alters how you hold responsibility. You still care. You still contribute, but you no longer take on what is not yours. This discernment happens internally before action. It does not require explanation. You simply do not move toward what does not belong to you. The transition from effort to ease is not linear. You may move back and forth between these states. Stress can temporarily pull the system back into management. This does not undo integration. It reveals where more safety is needed. Each return to effort is an opportunity to reestablish ease without judgment. Over time, ease becomes the default. Effort becomes occasional rather than constant. This is the mark of integration. The work has moved from conscious practice into embodied knowledge. You do not think your way into boundaries. You live them. From this place, a deeper loosening becomes possible. When effort drops away, identity structures that depended on it begin to soften. You may notice that roles you once inhabited feel less necessary. This softening can feel both relieving and unsettling. It opens the door to a different relationship with self, one less defined by coping and more by presence. This movement from integrated boundaries into a quieter sense of self is not something to force. It unfolds naturally when the system is no longer preoccupied with protection. What remains is space, and in that space, something essential can reorganize. Section 9, Identity Without Armor. Loosening the self that had to cope. For a long time, protection was not something you had. It was something you became. You learned to be the steady one, the understanding one, the one who could absorb without breaking. This was not a conscious identity choice. It emerged quietly, shaped by necessity. When emotional environments felt unpredictable or demanding, you adapted. You developed ways of staying intact by staying useful, perceptive, and composed. Over time, these adaptations hardened into self-concepts. They felt like personality, even character. But they were, at their core, strategies. When emotional protection becomes internal, these strategies begin to loosen, not abruptly, but gradually. You notice that you no longer need to track everyone else so closely. You no longer feel responsible for smoothing every edge. The system no longer requires constant vigilance. This creates an unfamiliar question. If I am not managing, holding, or containing everything, who am I now? This question can feel unsettling because the old identity was functional. It worked. It kept things stable. It earned appreciation, trust, and often reliance. Letting it soften can feel like losing structure, even when that structure was exhausting. The nervous system may respond with uncertainty, not because something is wrong, but because something familiar is dissolving. Identity in this context is not about personality traits, it is about orientation. The coping self was oriented outward. It derived coherence from responsiveness. Its sense of worth was often implicit, built through being needed, being capable, being emotionally available. When that orientation shifts inward, there can be a temporary sense of emptiness. Not absence, but space where effort used to be. This space is often misinterpreted as withdrawal or detachment. In reality, it is neutrality. The system is no longer organizing around constant input. It is resting in itself. This rest can feel strange if your sense of self was built through engagement. You may notice moments where you do not know what to say or do not feel compelled to respond at all. This is not loss of empathy. It is the emergence of choice. The understanding one often carries unspoken labor. Understanding becomes a way of maintaining harmony, sometimes at the expense of being understood. When this role loosens, you may feel less inclined to translate, contextualize, or soften everything. You may allow others to sit with their own discomfort or confusion. This does not make you uncaring. It means you are no longer managing experience for everyone involved. The strong one often learned that strength meant not needing, not leaning, not showing impact. Emotional protection reveals that this strength was actually endurance. Real strength includes the capacity to feel without collapsing and to receive without guilt. As endurance relaxes, vulnerability does not necessarily rush in. Often what appears first is simplicity, less performance, less proving. The emotional container role is perhaps the hardest to loosen. Being the one who can hold others creates a sense of purpose and identity. It also creates imbalance. When containment becomes internal, you no longer need to offer yourself as a vessel for others' unprocessed emotion. This can change how close some relationships feel. You may sense more distance, not because you withdrew, but because the dynamic shifted. This shift can bring grief, not dramatic grief, but a quiet recognition of how much you carried and how long you carried it. You may notice sadness for parts of yourself that never had space to exist outside of function. This sadness does not require analysis. It is part of integration. Feeling it without immediately explaining it is itself a sign of change. As old identities loosen, something quieter begins to appear. It is not a new role. It does not need definition. It is simply you without armor. This self is less reactive and less impressive. It does not manage perception. It does not rush to be useful. It has preferences, limits, and rhythms that were previously overridden. This quieter self can feel vulnerable, not because it is weak, but because it is no longer defended by constant doing. It exists without justification. It rests without apology. At first, this can feel exposed. Over time, it feels free. Importantly, loosening identity does not mean losing values. You may still care deeply. You may still be generous and empathic. The difference is that these qualities are no longer obligations. They arise naturally when there is capacity. When there is not, they recede without guilt. You may notice that you are less interested in being seen a certain way. Praise lands differently. Criticism passes more easily. This does not mean indifference. It means your sense of self is less dependent on external reflection. It is grounded internally, in sensation and presence rather than role. There may be moments where you wonder if you are becoming less interesting, less connected, less needed. These thoughts often come from the old identity trying to reassert itself. They soften with time as you experience connection that does not require self-erasure. Mutuality feels different, quieter, more spacious. As identity loosens, you may also notice an increase in choice around engagement. You can opt in without obligation and opt out without explanation. This is not avoidance. It is discernment. It reflects a system that trusts itself to know when engagement is nourishing and when it is not. This phase is not about constructing a new self. It is about allowing what remains when effort falls away. What remains is often simpler than expected. There is less narrative, less justification, more direct experience. You may find that you enjoy things differently. Solitude may feel richer. Interaction may feel more selective. Time feels less pressured. These are signs of a system no longer organized around coping. It is common during this stage to feel temporarily unanchored. The old identity provided orientation. Without it, there can be moments of not knowing what you want or who you are in relation to others. This uncertainty is not a problem to solve. It is a transitional state. Orientation returns, but it returns from within rather than through role. As the coping self relaxes, the need for armor diminishes. You are no longer bracing against impact. You can feel without preparing. This openness is not exposure. It is grounded. It does not leak because it is held. What emerges here is a sense of inner freedom that is difficult to describe. Not freedom from responsibility or connection, but freedom from compulsion. You are not driven by old patterns. You are not reacting from inherited roles. You are responding from presence. This freedom is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up as ease in moments that once felt charged, as neutrality where there was once tension, as choice where there was once obligation. From this place, life does not need to be managed so tightly. You can move through days without constant adjustment. This does not make life perfect. It makes it livable. As this identity shift stabilizes, the final question becomes practical rather than philosophical. How does this way of being live on day after day without becoming another role or effort? The answer is not found in rules, but in integration. And that integration is where the journey gently concludes. Section 10, Living Protected, Living Open, and Ongoing Choice. At the end of a long internal shift, there is often an expectation of arrival, a sense that something should now be complete, stable, resolved. But emotional protection does not arrive as a final state. It settles as an orientation, something you return to rather than achieve, something that lives in how you meet each moment, not in how well you maintain a particular condition. Living protected does not mean staying guarded. Living open does not mean staying exposed. The two are not opposites. When protection is internal, openness becomes possible without cost. You can meet experience directly because you are no longer bracing against it. You are not preparing to manage what might happen. You are responding to what is happening. This responsiveness is quiet. It does not announce itself through confidence or certainty. It feels more like availability without urgency. You can feel what you feel and still remain oriented to yourself. This orientation does not require effort. It is supported by everything you have already learned about pacing, containment, and regulation. There will be moments when old patterns reappear. Stress, fatigue, or unfamiliar situations can pull the system back toward exposure or control. This is not regression, it is information. Emotional protection is renewed through noticing, not correcting. Each moment offers a choice to pause, to feel, to return inward. The choice does not need to be dramatic to be effective. What changes most over time is your relationship to these moments. Instead of interpreting them as failure, you recognize them as invitations, opportunities to reestablish safety internally. You do not rush to fix yourself. You allow the system to recalibrate. This gentleness is part of integration. Daily life does not need to be reorganized around this work. There are no routines to maintain, no states to preserve. Emotional protection lives in small, ordinary moments, in the breath you allow to complete, in the pause before responding, in the choice to feel rather than perform. These moments accumulate quietly. Living from regulation rather than exposure changes how you experience time. There is less pressure to keep up, less sense of being behind. You move at the speed your system can integrate. This does not make life smaller, it makes it more precise. You invest energy where it matters and conserve it where it does not. Autonomy grows here, not as independence from others, but as alignment with yourself. You are not pushed or pulled as easily by external cues. You can care without absorbing. You can engage without losing ground. This autonomy is felt rather than asserted. It creates stability without rigidity. Inner freedom is often misunderstood as emotional detachment or self-sufficiency. What emerges instead is flexibility. You can be affected without being overwhelmed. You can be close without being consumed. You can be alone without withdrawing. This flexibility is the nervous system's natural state when it is no longer overextended. As you live this way, you may notice that your life becomes less narratively intense. There are fewer internal debates, fewer explanations running in the background. Experience feels more direct. You respond, you rest, you move on. This simplicity can feel unfamiliar if your inner world was once crowded. Over time, it becomes a relief. Importantly, nothing here requires you to become someone else. You do not need to adopt a new identity or philosophy. You are simply allowing what is already present to function without interference. Protection and openness coexist because they are no longer competing. The invitation in this work is not to hold on to what you have learned, but to trust it. Trust that your system knows how to return to regulation. Trust that you do not need to manage yourself constantly. Trust that safety can be felt internally, even when external conditions are imperfect. There is no endpoint to this process, and that is part of its freedom. You are not working toward completion. You are living from coherence. Each day offers different conditions, different challenges, different opportunities to choose presence over exposure. As this audiobook closes, there is nothing you need to remember or apply. The understanding you have gained is already part of you. It lives in how you pause, how you feel, how you allow yourself to be affected without leaving yourself. You are not required to protect your emotions perfectly. You are not required to remain open at all times. You are simply invited to notice where you are and to choose the orientation that feels most grounded in that moment. This choice is quiet. It does not demand discipline. It does not seek validation. It rests in the body's capacity to regulate and the mind's willingness to trust that capacity. Living protected, living open is not a technique. It is a way of relating to experience that leaves you intact. From here, life continues as it always has, but you meet it differently, with less effort, with more space, with a sense of inner freedom that does not need to be named to be real.